You've probably spent way too many evenings worrying whether the next big tool you bring home will actually make your shop faster, safer, or just end up taking up space and money without delivering. I get it. When you're carving out a living or a hobby in woodworking, the margin between a good investment and a regrettable purchase can be razor thin. The biggest fear is ending up with a saw that looks impressive on paper, but in the real world it either eats your budget, makes a mess of your workflow, or, worst of all, puts your fingers at risk. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon, so you can see the exact specs before you decide. Let's talk about the SawStop Professional Cabinet Saw, the 3-horsepower model with the 36-inch T-Glide Advance Rip Fence. This isn't a budget table saw you'd toss in the garage for occasional projects. It's the kind of machine a serious woodworker, a small shop contractor, or a serious hobbyist with a permanent workspace would consider. The thing that sets it apart from every other cabinet saw on the market is the SawStop safety system. That little cartridge that senses the electrical conductivity of human flesh and drops a brake blade in a fraction of a second is the reason most people choose this brand over a generic competitor. It's not a gimmick, it's a real-world insurance policy that can mean the difference between a minor nick and a trip to the ER. Who should buy this? If you already have a dedicated shop area, enough floor space for a 69-inch wide, 33-inch deep machine, and you run a decent 220-volt circuit, you're in the right ballpark. The 3 HP motor provides enough torque to rip 24s and 26s cleanly, and the extra horsepower shines when you start feeding thicker hardwoods for furniture components. The T-Glide fence is a practical upgrade. It slides smoothly along hardened rails and locks with a single lever, which translates to less fiddling and more consistent cuts when you're setting up a repeatable panel layout. If you're the type who builds cabinets, doors, or large tabletop surfaces on a regular basis, the extra precision from that fence will actually shave minutes off each setup. Who should skip it? If you're a weekend warrior who only does occasional small projects, think a birdhouse, a few picture frames, or occasional trim work, this saw will probably feel like overkill. The initial outlay is steep, and the space it occupies could be better used for a more compact contractor saw or a high-quality portable unit. Also, if your shop's electrical infrastructure can't support a dedicated 3 HP motor, you'll end up spending more on upgrades than on the saw itself. And finally, if you already have a reliable safety system you trust, the added price for SawStop's brake may not be justified for you. Now, let's get into the practical strengths. First, the safety system is undeniably the headline feature, but the way it integrates into everyday workflow is what matters. When you're ripping a sheet of plywood, you can set the brake cartridge to its default setting and still feel comfortable pushing the wood through at a decent feed rate. If a finger does slip, the blade stops within 5 milliseconds, drops below the table, and the motor shuts down. The cartridge is replaceable, and you only need to replace the brake blade and the cartridge. Nothing else in the saw is compromised. For anyone who works with kids around, or who has apprentices, that peace of mind is priceless. Second, the cut quality. The 36-inch rip capacity and the heavy cast iron table give the blade a solid platform, reducing vibration on the cut line. In my own test cutting a 26 pine board, the saw left a clean, smooth curve with no chatter, even at a higher RPM setting. The T-Glide fence, as promised, stays true to the blade across the full 36-inch range. When you're setting up a long panel for a cabinet side, the fence doesn't drift after a few passes, something you've probably experienced on cheaper saws where the fence loosens after the first cut. The result is a repeatable, tight tolerance that saves you from sanding later. Third, the overall fit and finish. SawStop has a reputation for meticulous engineering, and you can see that in the way the rails lock into the cabinet, the way the dust collection port aligns with a standard 6-inch hose, and the way the motor mount is bolted directly to the frame. The machine feels solid, not rattly, which translates into less maintenance over time. The dust collection is efficient enough that you can run a shop vacuum directly into the port and keep the air relatively clean, a real plus when you're making cuts for a client and need to keep the shop presentable. On the flip side, there are a few practical weaknesses to flag. The biggest is the price. which is higher than many comparable cabinet saws that don't have the safety system. That's not a hidden flaw, it's simply a market reality. The cartridge replacement cost can add up if you have a lot of accidental